I think in consulting with my colleagues, we want to do another round with you, Dr. Lubchenco, and then we'll go to the second panel. And if I could go back to this issue with the marine facility that we are talking about, I want to ask you about why NOAA didn't consider long-term costs is part of, you know, the indirect and long-term cost of such a facility.
Senator, Madam Chair, it's my understanding that we did consider the long-term costs.
No, I don't think you did consider the long-term cost, indirect cost of locating a facility. It's very clear that when you look at the requirements for the facility, that you are talking about proximity to research. In fact, it says proximity to the NOAA Western Regional Center in drivable miles, and it actually gives the exact location of 7600 Sandpoint Way, Northeast Seattle. So that's the proximity of the site, and we are talking about now a facility that's hundreds of miles away. You're talking about proximity to access to an airport and proximity to an airport. That is also a major regional airport hundreds of miles away. You talk about access to proximity to shipyard and dry dock. I'm assuming that's for repairs, and I'm assuming that also is hundreds of miles away. And so what this really means is because NOAA didn't follow the rules and came up with a way to skirt the rules, basically saying, NOAA, you know, we're exempt from the normal process that people go through. We don't have to account for these things. And the issue is it's long-term expense to the taxpayer. You clearly outlined in your requirements that you wanted to be close to the NOAA Center in Seattle. You outlined that you wanted to be close to an airport. You wanted to be able to get ship repairs easily. But you skirted the responsibility by coming up with a way to say that it's not a capital asset, so that you didn't have to meet the requirements that both your agency and OMB specify for these actual acquisitions. The issue is then that the taxpayer is going to have to pay extra costs on top of this because of a decision that NOAA just decided to evade answering the questions.
Madam Chair, my staff looked at the operational cost impacts of the Newport lease award. The long-term costs do include the lease costs. And I think some costs at Newport are anticipated to be higher, such as ship maintenance and transportation of goods to the facility. But the cost of federal salaries, housing allowances, utilities, and most importantly, the lease costs are less expensive at the Newport site.
That's exactly my point, Dr. Lubchenco, and I'd hope that you would drill down on this with your staff because they're handing you notes that make no sense. Of course, they're trying to say that it's cheaper to operate in Oregon, ignoring the long-term costs that you have clearly stated in the RFP as it relates to proximity. And so you're going to have long-term costs because you're going to be further away from Seattle, and you're going to have to travel back and forth to consult with the scientists that are there, and that's going to be expense. You're further away from dry dock, and that's going to be an expense. And it's going to be a long-term expense for us as a country. So I think that you know, we're going to have to get the Inspector General to review this issue. But I would, if I were you, drill down on the fact that the internal process that NOAA operated under was broke. It evaded the real responsibilities it had in this analysis. So let me ask you,
Madam Chair, could I respond to that, please?
Yes, please.
I do believe that we took into account the travel costs and associated costs that you are mentioning. And I think it's useful to know that approximately 22% of all the scientists on the 3 vessels that are home ported in Seattle are I'm sorry, of the scientists that are, let me say that differently. Of all the scientists that go on those 3 vessels, 22% of them are from the Seattle NOAA facility. So I think that's important information to understand. The other piece of information is that most of the scientists that go on these vessels don't board the vessel where it's home ported. They fly to the port that is nearest to where they will be doing their research. And of the scientists on those 3 vessels, 67% of the scientists travel to go to the closest home port where they are. So, for example, in the different ships that operate different places, let's say there's a hake survey that's happening all along the west coast of the U.S. The scientists, both from Seattle as well as from other either NOAA laboratories or academic institutions, would typically fly to San Diego or San Francisco to board the ship. So it's not the travel costs to which you are referring assume that people are boarding the ship right in Seattle. And in fact, that's not what typically happens.
I think NOAA is playing with the information at a hearing, which is just astounding to me. Your own documents say that 80% of the programs using the ship are in Seattle. The factors of site location, factor A, which are the primary reasons why you're looking for this site and what it should do, doesn't say anything about the scientists on the ship. That is the people behind you handing you a note telling you that's the reason why they made the decision. But when you look at an acquisition process, it actually has to follow what the acquisition requirements are. And so number 3 on the list is proximity to the NOAA Western Regional Center. It doesn't say how convenient it is for a handful of scientists to fly in and off of that site. It basically says 80% of the programs are in Seattle, and that's what you're interacting with. And so if you move that 300 miles away, you're now taking them away. That would be like saying we're going to take, this committee and operate it in, someplace in Virginia and ignore the cost of everybody having to travel back and forth to the Capitol to get access to everybody else who's here on Capitol Hill. So we will, I want to ask you one more question.
Madam Chair, could I just clarify one thing, please?
Yes, but if you could also answer this question for me, if, in fact, NOAA has reached a final decision on this issue.
We have not reached a final decision on this issue. We are proceeding with the recommendations of the GAO to look at the floodplain issues and whether there is a practical alternative to Newport, and we are in the middle of that process.
That's why.
Could I clarify
I wanted to ask you about that because in the same day that you say that there haven't been a decision, in the newspaper, NOAA officials said that other sites were not practical alternatives. So it sounds as if you've reached a conclusion, and it sounds like you're moving ahead. So if your own officials are being quoted as saying that other sites aren't an alternative, I don't know how you can continue to go through the process. So we're looking for a real analysis of this, not a not a continuation of NOAA's policy to think that they can go down this path.
I understand. I'd like to just clarify the 80% figure. That refers to the number of projects that are sponsored by NOAA on those vessels. And for any particular project, there are many scientists, some of whom are from our Northwest Fisheries Science Center lab. Many are from other NOAA facilities. Others might be academic individuals. And so the numbers that I quoted you, about 67% of the scientists having to travel to meet the ships and only 22% of the scientists on the ship being from NOAA, are not contrary to the 80% figure. they are they're different numbers. The 80% are the projects that are sponsored by NOAA, but those projects might include individuals from a number of different places. Just to explain what those different numbers mean.
And I'm asking you to review Factor A, requirements for location of the site. It doesn't say anything about scientists flying in and off of the ships at what location. It says the proximity to NOAA Western Regional Center. That is what you've outlined as the number 3 priority of a list of 12 factors that are the primary A factors for considering this location. So it doesn't say anything about scientists and the number of scientists that can fly in and off of the vessel. It says proximity to the Western Regional Center and actually gives the exact address. So that's pretty specific. And so I think that we're going to have to get more insight because we're not going to leave the taxpayers on the hook for long-term expenses of this facility. Dr. Lubchenco, there was a 1998 Inspector General report that was similar, in addressing these NOAA fishery issues, and it found a greater need from NOAA for leadership and changes in the ratio of these various positions. And so why weren't these earlier recommendations, why weren't they implemented? Why were they ignored?
Madam Chair, I can't answer that because it was before my time. The first that I was aware of this earlier report was from the IG's, from the current IG's report. And
Could you go back and do an analysis for us and give us an answer on that? Because I think you'll find that the same issues of why those recommendations weren't implemented will be the same reasons why these won't be followed up on as well. So that would be, many times these things are inherent in large organizations who resist the change or change isn't implemented, and so it's very important to find out what resistance occurred from the last report, because we don't want to do another report in a few years and find the same issue. So these are cultural barriers within organizations that have to be broken down, and until you go back to find out why the last time they weren't adhered to, I think you're going to find you're going to have a tough time moving forward.
I appreciate that suggestion.
Thank you. And so we'll look forward to hearing your answer to that. So, Mr. Zinser, what is the root of this, perception? I mean, elaborating on your findings that existing law enforcement actions against fisheries are perceived as arbitrary and unfair. So what do you think is at the root of that perception?
I think at the root of that perception is the fact that when a fisherman is violated or charged with a violation, the decision on what will be charged, how many counts will be charged, how much will be assessed for each charge, is uncertain to the fisherman. The penalty schedule that currently exists for NOAA's civil penalty assessments gives the individual enforcement attorneys broad discretion whether to assess at the lower end of the schedule or at the upper end of the schedule, gives broad discretion on whether they get charged one time or numerous times, up to 20 and 30 times. And there are also cases where the fishermen will know that they have been found to have violated the regulations, but it could take months and sometimes years for them to actually get the notice from NOAA of what the assessment's going to be. I've heard stories of fishermen going out to their mailbox every day worried that today is the day that the assessment's going to come. That perception is throughout at least New England, lesser so in other parts of the country.
And why do you think that is?
I think that the enforcement personnel in the regions have been left to implement regulatory enforcement without sufficient guidance from the national leadership.
And in other regions, those issues have been resolved?
We did not find the same type of issues in other regions, somewhat in the southeast, but our concern is that the types of, or the lack of management that exists, you could have the same issues cropping up in other parts of the country, and I think that needs to be fixed.
Thank you.